Tai Lung. The main villain? Okay, no. The main antagonist of the first Kung Fu Panda film is somehow both underrated and frankly confusing, both from a writing perspective and a character perspective. So why do I consider the true Dragon Warrior here confusing? Well, it's his motivations, and yes, I said motivations as in the plural form of the word. The motivation he's introduced with is taking the scroll slash revenge. Well, kind of. I've heard others say that in Tai Lung's original intended backstory there was no so-called rampage, and that he was supposed to just go after the scroll directly. And I believe it for a number of reasons. The most important reason is the rampage simply doesn't make sense at all. Why attack the valley when the scroll is in the Jade Palace and nobody knows your intent yet? It being a last-second addition also explains several things. Most relevant here is the fact that the so-called rampage consisted of a few panning still shots, none of which are very clear on what he actually did other than damage some property and scare the living hell out of some of the valley's inhabitants. Maybe injured some folk too. If he did kill anyone during this little outburst, it is not made clear at all. It could have happened, but at the same time, it might not have. We just don't know. In fact, all Tigress says is that he laid waste to the valley. That is a really, really vague statement from somebody who likely didn't actually see it happen. Now, we do not hear anything in the film about him attacking villages or farmers, or anything like that. He seems to just be making a beeline for the Jade Palace, which does actually reinforce the whole scroll motivation. His original motivation gets a bit skewed, however, when he meets the Five, likely having little to no idea who they are other than Shifu's new students, if he even knew that much about them. It's entirely possible he just thought they were random martial artists out to make a name for themselves. He does say that Shifu taught them well at the end of the fight, but he almost certainly would recognize Shifu's teachings in them, so it's really no proof that he knew at the start of the fight. And how does he react? Well, after being kicked in the face by a complete stranger, where it's not even made entirely clear if he was actually attacking them or just trying to get past them, he starts casually chatting with them, and I do mean casually. No signs of aggression or anger at that point, even though they just try to drop him to his death. And no, growling at Tigress does not count, because she was growling at about the same time, and honestly, that's just a cat thing. This does mean that Tai Lung didn't even actually start moving across the bridge towards them until after Tigress had acted with clear aggressive intent, and both Crane and Tigress had taken combat stances. Oh, and after being kicked in the face and starting a casual conversation, he does not even start the fight. Tigress attacks first, while he is not even looking at her. And then, let's not forget, when he learns the Dragon Warrior's name, there's no sign of anger towards Poe for claiming the title. In fact, he is excited for a legendary battle. This shifts his motivation from the scroll itself to actually challenging himself through combat, or perhaps just being remembered for a very long time. At least it does for a while. It's a bit bizarre. Now, once he defeats the Five, and leaves the people that just tried to kill him without a second thought, mind you, alive, Shifu tells the Five it's to make them feel fear, which again makes no sense, and is almost certainly Shifu projecting what he thinks should be occurring onto what is actually occurring. Unless Shifu himself specifically taught Tai Lung to cause as much fear in potential opponents as possible, which seems unlikely. In the movie, Tai Lung shows basically no signs that he wants to be feared. It would frankly be antithetical to his entire backstory, honestly. Even the rampage part of it, after all, that kind of rampage is certainly not planned. And his entire pre-rampage motivation was to make his adopted father proud of him. This does not suggest he would want people to fear him. If that were really the case, he could have easily left just one of the Five still breathing and let the last living member carry their comrades' broken bodies back to the Jade Palace, instead of very clearly holding back for nearly the entire fight. After all, when he ends the fight, it's with an almost unburdened ease. He's not even breathing heavier. And that was with 4 of the 5 throwing everything they could at him. Mantis was holding the bridge the whole time. The next time we see Tai Lung is when he arrives at the Jade Palace, seemingly having chosen to bypass the Valley of Peace and its inhabitants entirely. Why would he bypass or ignore the valley? Well, a better question is, why wouldn't he? His rampage was done during an emotional boiling point where he certainly wasn't thinking clearly, if he was thinking at all. Other than Shifu's clearly panic attack driven imagination, there is absolutely no sign that the Tai Lung we follow in the film is concerned with vengeance against the valley and its people. Even they certainly don't seem that worried, assuming they were told. They are neither a threat to him, nor are they responsible for him winding up in the Rhino prison. He also greets Shifu as if he were still his master and he's still the student, and it is not done in some kind of twisted ploy. He seems genuine, at least in the moment. During their fight, Tai Lung even stops to tell Shifu it's now his decision who gets the scroll, switching his focus to an odd but appropriate mix of seeking Shifu's validation and the scroll itself. It even seems for a moment when Shifu is down that Tai Lung is reconsidering, well, everything. After their fight, and Shifu has clearly lost the fight, and might be about to lose a lot more than that, Po shows up with the Dragon Scroll. And Tai Lung's response is, hilariously, to punch him in the face and grab the scroll. Not exactly lethal force against a so-called dragon warrior. Their fight then commences, and again, after not killing an opponent, Tai Lung finally gets a hold of the scroll, which at this point is all the motivation he really has left. Honestly, it's really the only thing he has left at all. And when he opens the scroll to see it empty, he's confused and frankly lost. Then, Po tells him the truth about the scroll, and when he can't accept it, in anger he tries to nerve strike Po, which is a technique we never see used with intent to kill, at all. So, even after being told what he has been seeking his entire life was at best an illusion and at worst a cruel deception, his response is to attack the person that both got in his way and broke that news to him with a most likely non-lethal attack. Then, after a short scuffle, Po straight up kills a clearly battered and broken Tai Lung with the finger hold. I think. It's not made very clear how the technique works at this point, but Tai Lung is terrified of it, and Po most certainly thinks it's an instant death move. Think about this, though. That means after everything is said and done, the only certain known lethal force used in the movie is against the Rhino guards who, let's face it, were not exactly innocent, and against Tai Lung, the antagonist himself. Oops. In summary, his motivation goes from taking the scroll into maybe revenge, then into wanting a challenging fight, then into making Shifu proud of him, and finally settling for the scroll almost as a consolation prize to what he actually wanted. It's kind of all over the place. I know real life is messy, but character writing doesn't have to be. Now, Tai Lung isn't the main focus of the movie, so it's way less of a problem than if Po's motivations had been ever-changing. Fortunately, when someone's only real motivation is their love of a specific art and self-improvement, there's not much that can be changed by learning that art, other than gaining a more nuanced respect for said art. I do have a rather simple thought about how this could be fixed. Just drop the rampage entirely. Hear me out on this. In the film proper, it's obvious Tai Lung's mostly locked up for the rampage. However, having Tai Lung's only crime be attempting to steal the scroll would, yes, make him more sympathetic than he already was, but it would also go a long way to explain his lack of willingness to just kill everyone in his path, and honestly, it would actually make him seem far more dangerous. After all, why lock him up for life when his only crime was attempted theft unless he was so skilled, so dangerous, and so near deranged that there was literally no other choice? It would also explain a lot of his counterintuitive behavior in the film. Certainly not a perfect solution, but since the rampage makes no sense anyways, we're not losing anything important by dropping it. Before I end the video, I want to go over some things people have called Tai Lung in other videos, comments, and discussion boards, because I find some of them just fascinating, and I often disagree with these opinions. So let's go over each one, and I'll give my opinion one at a time. Let's start with this. Tai Lung aspires to power. No, he doesn't. At least not directly. He does what he does to make Shifu proud. Even after escaping prison, he is still not immediately aggressive towards Shifu, and he only wanted the scroll in the first place because of Shifu. At best, it's a consolation prize. Now, on to the next idea. Tai Lung is ruthless. No. He doesn't actually kill the five, and clearly doesn't want to kill Shifu at first. As for the Rhino guards, yeah, holding back against your literal abuser should never be in the cards. And even then, most of the ones that died only did so because they threw literal explosives inside a cave. The entire fight was him escaping. Next up is the idea that he has an inferiority complex. No, he doesn't. This one strikes me as entirely unthought out because Oogway outclasses both Shifu and Tai Lung in every way imaginable, and it doesn't seem to bother him, at least as far as we know. Remember, he was heading to the palace post-escape for the scroll and Shifu, not a rematch with Oogway. Being essentially one-shot by the old turtle did not seem to bother him at all. On to the idea that he is irredeemable. Honestly, when it's clear that any number of things could have changed the course of his life, and no, I don't mean in some wacky time-travel butterfly effect way, I mean that just having one thing other than what Shifu pushed on him being truly important to him likely could have outright stopped the events that led up to Kung Fu Panda. So no, he is not irredeemable even if we stuck to the movie's canon events. It would not be an easy road for him, but we have seen far worse characters redeemed over time. Some of them even made sense. The next idea is that Tai Lung is arrogant. Yeah, I have no problem with him being called this, as long as it's understood that it's not an unearned arrogance. He really is a better fighter than basically everyone else except Oogway, and that's really the only metric we see him judge others by in the film, except for perhaps Shifu. However, they are all martial artists. We don't even see him interact with non-combatants, so we can't really know whether or not he views them as inferior simply because they're not fighters. His perspective on that is straight up missing from the film. And now, on to the idea that he thought the title of Dragon Warrior was his right. Kind of, but not exactly. He thought the title was something that could be earned. This is made very clear. He was outright taught to think he could earn it. Which leads into the big one. Tai Lung feels quote-unquote entitled to the title and scroll. And I'm just gonna say it, yes, kinda, and also hell no, kinda. The so-called entitlement here is that he thought he had done enough to earn the title of Dragon Warrior. But working your ass off every day of your life to earn something you've been led to believe you can earn by somebody you trust implicitly, no less, is not true entitlement. Misguided, maybe, but not entitlement, at least not the modern interpretation. He doesn't feel it's his natural right. He believes fully that he earned the right to the title through sheer body-breaking training. And while feeling he has earned the right to said title fits one of the literal dictionary definitions of the word, it most certainly doesn't fit the modern interpretation of it, i.e., believing you have the right to something regardless of whether you have earned the actual right to it or not. For instance, most would consider a billionaire's child that inherited their parents' money entitled because they did nothing to earn it, but Tai Lung most certainly did everything he thought was in his power to earn the scroll. He just never realized it couldn't be earned. Apparently nobody ever bothered explaining that to him. Oops. There's a reason people use the term entitled brat quite a bit, and it's pretty much never in regards to somebody who earned what they have. Tai Lung has most certainly earned his speed, strength, agility, and skill, so him thinking that he could earn the scroll is a mix of misinformation, at best problematic teaching, and frankly, delusion on his own part. A lot of people see Tai Lung as sympathetic simply because he was raised by someone who pushed him towards a literal, unattainable goal, which does make sense, at least. However, I personally find him sympathetic for a different reason. He is somewhat ironically a very human character, probably one of DreamWorks' most human. Everything Tai Lung did was, as weird as this sounds, for family. Everything he did to make Shifu, his father, proud. After Shifu's confession, he wavers for a moment. Unfortunately, at this point, it was just too late. Tai Lung had accepted that gaining the scroll was all he had left. It was desperation. Desperation for a lifetime of hard work and another lifetime of being locked away to mean something. To mean anything. What's more human than wanting what you've accomplished in your life to have real meaning? Some people call Tai Lung a fallen hero, and while there is a grain of truth to that, the much harsher truth is, he is a man broken by a lifetime of false hope. Being led to believe you can accomplish anything, even the impossible, is a very cruel fate, because when you do encounter the impossible, it either breaks your worldview, or it breaks you. When you think nothing is impossible, You just don't stop until your mind cracks or your body does. And if you're a martial artist trained to mentally handle even the most stressful situation, your body will probably break first, leaving you asking the question, why? Why did I believe I could do this? From my point of view, this is part of why Tai Lung loses to Po. Remember, Tai Lung had just fought Shifu, one of, if not the greatest fighter aside from himself, in all of China, in what was an incredibly intense and a very physically and emotionally draining battle. And this was after he ran across the country with what was likely minimal rest after 20 years locked in the same position. No matter how capable he is, he was most certainly not at his best during this fight, but couldn't bring himself to believe he could lose. Thematically, Po had to win, but I do wonder what the result would have been of a fight between Po and a completely rested prime Tai Lung. We'll likely never see it, but it's an interesting thought. That does actually bring up the one thing I am dead certain of. If Tai Lung had not underestimated Po, Po would have lost. Remember, during almost their entire fight, he's trying to grab the scroll. He is not actually fighting Po, and he still wins the first round. And then Po only wins the overall fight because his body and style are a cartoonish counter to Tai Lung's style. It's honestly my only true problem with the movie. Up until this point, all of the fights involving Tai Lung have been incredible displays of martial prowess. The entire fight with Po is basically slapstick. It isn't terrible, but it most certainly isn't the final fight Tai Lung deserved. Well, I can't keep going forever, so I'll just say thank you for listening to my inane ramblings.